Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please mute your laptop. So assalamu alaikum again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this program. Krista, can you mute your laptop? I can hear myself speaking back. How about now? Can you hear me now? I can still hear. So while we're setting up the technical stuff, while we're setting that up, so again, in terms of what's happening in the world today, and this is something that we have seen time and time again. It's not something new. We have seen this in different times where different parts of the world have been attacked by injustice, the oppression, and we see the impact of it and how it can hurt people physically, mentally, as well as fatally. So the issue here, when we take a look at from a mental health perspective, what we want to do is examine what trauma is all about, how it can impact you on so many different levels, and so on and so forth. So the sound is still an issue. Your headphones are not plugged in properly into the phone. Okay, but I can still hear, and everybody else can hear. They can hear my voice twice. Do you want to just plug it in and plug it out again? Inshallah. How about now? Can you hear me? Yes, I don't hear myself anymore. So that was the issue. Alhamdulillah wa shukr. So joining us today is Sister Krista Arnold, which I'll be introducing in a second. So I think, yeah, Instagram, you should be fine now. Inshallah, you can hear our voice clearly. And the sister and I were inspired. We were chatting about this the other day, and we were always sharing with each other all of the, and I'm sure all of us have been doing this the last few days in terms of just sharing the atrocities that we've been seeing, whether it's happening in Afghanistan and Palestine. And it's been quite traumatizing for all of us. We can only imagine how those people who are living in these areas, what they are going through. And when we take a look at psychological trauma, right? Because a lot of people mix them up sometimes in terms of somebody who exhibits symptoms of trauma as calling them dramatic. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So what we see here is the importance of looking at what psychological trauma is all about. And it is the damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a distressing event. And we've had some programs before on trauma in light of different events, whether it's domestic abuse and violence, whether it is the explosion that took place in Beirut back in last summer and how that impacted people. And we took a look at how this trauma is often the result of the overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved with that experience. So what we see here as a result of that potentially is the post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And this, in fact, is a mental illness, right? It involves exposure to trauma involving death or the threat of death, serious injury, could be sexual violence as well. So something is traumatic when it is very frightening, right? It's overwhelming and causes that distress. Like we said, it's often unexpected. And many people say that they felt powerless to stop or change the event. These events could include crimes, natural disasters, accidents, war or conflict, which is what we're seeing most these days, right? Or other threats to our lives. And it could be an event or situation that you experience yourself or something that happens to others, including loved ones, and even people that we don't know. And this is the case of what's happening today, of what we are seeing in media, not necessarily in the media, because we know that main media around the world is not covering these events as it should be, and that's another issue to address. But we are seeing the power of social media in a positive light here, in a positive way, how people are sharing the news as it happens, right? And for those of us who are watching that, that can also cause a lot of PTSD and other forms of trauma, right? We know that PTSD causes, excuse me, to forgive me, I still have the post-COVID cough here, that it could include intrusive symptoms, right? So such as re-experiencing that traumatic event. And most people describe having vivid nightmares, flashbacks, thoughts of the event that seem to come out of nowhere even, right? So they often avoid things that remind them. So we often take a look at the example of a car accident, somebody who's been in a car crash, that they would relate it to that. So after introducing our topic, inshallah, what we're going to get into today in terms of taking a look at what is trauma in light of what's happening, how it impacts people who are living there, as well as outside. We'll be taking a look at what are the effects of suppressing such trauma. And alhamdulillah, we have some really great resources that we'd like to share with you as well. And the second part, we'll be taking a look at strategies in terms of how we can cope and manage, especially when in a situation that you feel helpless, right? Where you don't have power or control over the situation to do anything about it, but definitely we'll take a look at what we can do essentially to make us manage this. So I'd like to welcome our dear sister Arnold, now that we've got all the technicalities in place and I don't have to hear myself twice, and Instagram as well. I'd like to introduce Sister Krista Arnold, who is a dear friend and somebody that I look up to and learn from a lot, mashallah. She is a registered child and youth counselor with 14 years experience working with families fleeing violence. She has also worked with a range of marginalized communities and is currently working on completing her degree in religion, mashallah, at Carleton University. And she is also a convert and a mother of 4 beautiful children, mashallah. God bless you. Thank you so much, dear sister, for joining us today and sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And you and I have always had great conversations, and it seemed only natural to be able to work together so that we can share and discuss this, and inshallah people can join in. We have this ability now on Instagram where other people can join in as well, and we'll see if we can add you on to the Facebook as well as YouTube feed. So Krista, I'd like to begin this discussion with taking a look at, how would you define trauma, especially the trauma that we are witnessing today with the recent attacks in Afghanistan. For those of you who are not aware, there was a school last weekend by the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada that was targeted, and it was a school for young girls who, subhanAllah, are going to seek an education, and they were targeted and killed. And it was devastating to see the pictures. God only knows how their families must have felt, especially before Eid, last few days of Shahr Ramadan. And of course, what's happening in Palestine and Palestine, day after day, the violence, and other parts of the world, of course, but right now, recently, it has been these two. And even just in the last couple of days of Eid, there was another targeting in Afghanistan, in Kabul, where people were attending Salat al-Eid and they were also attacked. So we want to take a look at here, in terms of this type of trauma, how would you define it? Right. Yes. Yes. It's deliberate. Right. Right. Yes. Right. Very key. Absolutely. No. Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's already been that long. Mm. Yes. Yes. Into that. Yeah. Occupation. Yes. 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 Right. Intergenerational. Yeah. Trauma. Right. Right. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's such a narrow view of what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh. Oh. Ouch. Oh. Unbelievable. Of course. Especially given the background. Yeah. To Canada. Yeah. To heal it. Absolutely. Inshallah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Has no peace. Yeah. And inshallah, and please no apologies. It's wonderful, in-depth, you could say, analysis in terms of what this type of trauma that we're looking at, how it can impact people, right? And we're not going to get into politics at all here. No, we're strictly speaking about the impact of this from a mental health perspective. I think there's a lot going on out there in terms of reports and so on and so forth, in terms of how to understand the politics of all of this. This is to help people understand how to deal with what you were seeing, because a lot of you who are looking at the pictures and the videos that are coming out, they are horrendous. They're horrible. They're horrible. And this is the reality of the world that we're living in. And sometimes we're far removed from that and even desensitized. We, you know, the statistics show that you watch 8 people in a show within an hour, or an hour rather, you can see 8 people get murdered. Then your mind becomes numb to that. And when you see these types of things, especially in the world of video games and gaming, killing and shooting people, it becomes the norm. And when you see that often enough, it doesn't have an impact on you anymore, on your humanity, right? And so we're going to explore that in a little bit more depth again today. Thank you so much, Krista, for that. And I wanted to kind of look at now in terms of what are some of the impact of when we take a look at, in terms of, so I forgot to put the questions up on the screen here. We got right into it right away, right? So this was our first discussion, taking a look at those. You can see it on the screen here. And so the second part we're going to take a look at, let's look at some typical triggers from trauma. What could be some of the triggers? And before we get into that, I wanted to show this video here of this young girl who speaks so eloquently in terms of what happened to her and how she experienced trauma. So let's take a look at that here. Those of you who are on Instagram, I'm sorry you're not going to be able to see that. You're just going to have to wait a bit. What I will do afterwards is share it on my story, and then you can, actually I'll share it on my story now as we're speaking. And for those of us on YouTube, I'm going to give this a try right here and just post it.
I'm always sick. I'm always out of milk. I can't do anything. See all of this. What do you expect me to do? Fix it? I'm only 10. I can't even do anything this morning. I just want to be a doctor or anything to help my people, but I can't. I'm just a kid. I don't even know what to do. I get scared, but not really that much. I do anything for my people, but I don't know what to do. I'm just 10. I'm just 10. All of this, when I see it, I literally cry every day, saying to myself, why do we deserve this? What did we do to this? My family said they just hate us. They just don't like us because we are Muslims. Why does Muslims act for you like that? We're just kids. You see all of the kids around me? They're just kids. Why wouldn't you just send a missile to them and kill them? It's not fair. It's not fair.
So those of you who are able to see this video, this young 10-year-old child speaks so eloquently of what she has seen around her and what she's been living through, and saying that it's not fair. And you can see her strength as well. It says, you know, it bothers me, it hurts, but not that much. Like, she's still showing strength. And this right there is showing somebody with resilience, but almost later on, potentially in life, how this can traumatize her, potentially even desensitize some people who don't have the heart, right? But let's take a look at the deeper impacts here. So what are some of the trauma triggers that you have seen over time, that you've seen in people, and just what you know of from our line of work, Krista? And while you're doing that, I'm going to try and post it on my story so you guys can see that. Go ahead, Krista. So, yeah. I think you might be, sorry, Krista, I think you're on mute. This whole time, I think you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself? No, not Instagram. Yes, you have to unmute yourself on the computer. Everything you said, we didn't hear you.
That's okay, because it was
there you go.
unmuted.
Now go ahead and say. So when we're taking just to
no
here,
problem.
yeah, the list of trauma triggers. So
Yeah.
we're looking at what it could be from internally as well as externally.
I'll review, but just to apologize for everyone, I share my computer with an 8-year-old for the online school, which is a very unpleasant experience for us. So it said unmute, it said mute. So
yeah,
anyway,
I just noticed it now. Yeah,
thank
go
you,
ahead.
Thank you for giving my friends.
No,
So we were discussing things like that. The trauma triggers could be, the big ones is what I started with: war, violence, whether it's domestic violence, it could be a random act of violence, like a witnessing crime is, a robbery, these things, car accidents.
What's the actual trigger though? Like we're looking at memory. We're looking at like what happens to the person, like when they see these things, like we've described the trauma, but let's look at the triggers now. Yeah.
Yes, but when you have, we'll pick, for example, illness. I had a client I worked with for a really long time, and she experienced leukemia at a very young age. Alhamdulillah, she was able to, she was in remission for a number of years, but anytime her children experienced illness, she would completely shut down. Because her experiences through her illness, number one, it was leukemia, which is a very serious illness. It has a very, very high, mortality rate. Number two, she didn't have culturally appropriate support in the hospital when she was accessing support in the hospital. She didn't have her parents. Her parents were not able to be with her because of finances. Her parents had to reside in another town. She was alone. She was young.
Yes.
So whenever her children would experience illness, it would be quite, she would freeze. She would completely freeze. She wouldn't be able to eat. She wouldn't be able to sleep. Her body aches. It would be, she was, mashallah, a young, healthy woman, 28 years old, but she wouldn't be able to walk. When she walked, it would look like you see your grandpa watching. She had to have a cane.
So here we see, so physiologically here, we see here, when we're looking at internal, right, there's a lot going on in the body. The heart rate goes up. There's the freeze and flight response of stress. There's lots of emotions, right? There's perhaps even physical pain. Sometimes you have some unexplained pain that occurs in your body due to these triggers, right? Sometimes some of these triggers could be not only just a memory, right, but a person. Like you could see somebody that reminds you of somebody, a sound, a smell, right?
Yeah. It could
watching
be a
movies, TV shows, a color,
Yeah.
an argument.
An argument, a smell. Smell. There was a number of clients I worked with where it would be the smell of gas, the benzene, the smell of gas.
Right.
I had a number of clients who survived the genocide in Rwanda, and it was they couldn't see the color red.
Wow.
Because
it was very triggering for them.
It was very triggering, and I remember when we would discuss it sometimes as a staff to provide support, as professionals and as people who hadn't experienced that trauma, we really had to be cognizant of our judgment.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people throw the word trauma and PTSD and addiction and all these words out like they're buzzwords and they're trendy and people use them
without even understanding fully.
Without understanding fully, like when we see this young girl, she's so eloquent and she's so dignified. She has a dignity that she's holding on to, but we forget that she's wearing her pajamas.
Yes.
That she was bombed while she was sleeping. And she's holding that dignity because it's the only thing keeping her up and the only thing keeping her family up. But it could be the color red, the color of her blanket. It could be the smell of gas. It could be the smell of it could be seeing someone walk by who just looks like someone who stopped you at the checkpoint or something. And it's that small moment that if you don't have the strategies, if you don't have the supports, it can be very difficult to come back from that, like alhamdulillah, she's strong and she's like,
there's so much dignity in her. Yeah.
But she's she's so young, and you see the
Yes.
confusion, and you see the
Yes.
shock when she's
Yes.
really trying to make sense of it, because that's what we do in any situation. It's our
Yes.
human nature.
Right.
But without having the support of identifying her triggers and identifying what she needs to do to support herself in the situations, because she is going to be triggered. It's kind of like diabetes, right? Once you have diabetes, you need life-term support, proper diet,
Absolutely.
exercise, sleep. You need to take care of your mental health. You need to do self-care. Experiencing this type of trauma it's a lifetime illness. And
Absolutely.
people with this illness can be supported. They're going to live happy and healthy, faithful lives, but we have to support them, and we have to support them in the right way.
Absolutely. Exactly. And somebody, to add to that, I recall a client of mine years ago who themselves experience, and I just have to put out there for those who are watching, we are going to be discussing things that are intense, that could potentially trigger you if you've had some past trauma as well in your life, and what you were watching today on the news and in social media could be very triggering for you, right? So this client rather, they had experienced a sexual assault, repeated sexual assault, and this was done by the military of her country. So when she settled after years in North America and stabilized, the trauma came back after years. And I recall one time in my office, as we were going through our therapy, and alhamdulillah, we had really great sessions where there was progress in her treatment. I do recall one time while we were sitting, and it was a lovely summer day, and on our pre-COVID and our campus, we have a beautiful nature scenery on our campus, and also our campus is used for training. People will rent out parts of the campus, especially over the summer leading up to Canada Day. The military will use the campus to train for the celebrations, the military. And I recall as we were chatting one time, they came by practicing with the music, and she froze and she panicked. And a lot of what we've described here was textbook, right? And it was fascinating to see how she responded, but we took advantage of the moment to use it as part of the treatment. And that's sometimes exposure therapy is used in trauma, but you have to be a very skilled, trained therapist to do that, because also we are taught and trained when we deal with trauma therapy. This is, by the way, it's one of my favorite therapies to work with people. I'm trained in it as well, is not to talk about the event as often, because it's triggering. And not only is it triggering, what happens in trauma, when you repeat the story, you're strengthening the neural pathways of the memory. And then this stays forefront, stays here, right? And it keeps coming out. What we want to do in trauma therapy is break the connection between the memory and the trigger, right? So that when you are encountered with the trigger, and the memory doesn't come as harshly. So that's what we're trying to do. We want to break that neural connection, but repeatedly talking about it strengthens it, right? So there's a fine line between exposure therapy and working on that. What are your thoughts on that, Krista?
I was just going to say, because that's important, because especially with having access to the internet and social media and this, we see a lot of, I'm trying to find the best way to say it. A lot of unskilled people, or people without the training or understanding, applying these techniques, and it can end up very dangerous. There's a lot of videos we see. It's like a clickbait where people post it, and they want people to see this great deed that they did, this way that they're walking someone through their trauma, or how they're supporting someone, or this is my friend and A, B, C, and D happened to her, and we're gonna face it, and she's gonna be stronger and better for it. And it's exactly like you said, but it's very, very dangerous, because, like you said, you're strengthening that memory.
Yeah.
You're investing in it, as opposed to investing in yourself and the strategies and things that are going to help you be healthy. And also, our body, our brain is kind of like an iPhone, right? We all have various models.
Yeah.
Some days the model of my iPhone brain changes from morning to night, but there's a limited amount of storage that we have. Exactly. And our brain prioritizes what we're going to store there. And the stuff it doesn't think is a priority, it's going to store elsewhere in our body because we never really forget.
Exactly.
We forget where we put the memories, and there's a lot of that, and that's where the muscle aches come from. That's where the abdomen
Subhanallah. Yeah, like where it goes in those places, and it comes out in our triggers.
It comes out, and if we're strengthening the trauma, the strategies, the positive memory, things that boost you, things that help you, are going to be stored elsewhere, and they're not going to be accessible, and you're going to have to redo all of the work again. Which is why it's really important when you know someone's experiencing trauma, you can provide support. You can support them. That's not an issue.
Yeah.
But there's you have to be cognizant of and aware of what your limits are. Like, I'm a child and youth counselor, but I cannot do trauma therapy. Mm-hmm. There's certain things I can't do. Not because I do have the experience. I've worked with the clients. I've worked with a range of them, but I don't have the expertise.
Exactly. It's just like, you've got different types of surgeons for the brain, for the heart. You can't, they're trained in that specialty.
You don't want a brain surgeon working on your feet.
No, it's got to be the right person.
Surgery. And it doesn't put anyone down because we all need to work together. It's why we don't have two heads. God in his wisdom and mercy did not give us a spare, but he gave us two hands.
Yeah, so I just noticed with our alhamdulillah, now with our discussion right now, we jumped straight ahead into part 2. So let's stick to discussing. Yeah, no, we were a little bit. Yeah, let's back it up. Inshallah, we'll get to answering these questions because people are asking, what, without doing more harm, how can we help and support? That's the difference. We'll answer this later on, but it's about supporting versus professional help, right? So I've got to be careful. So I just wanted to continue this question here that we started off on and went all over the place, which is great information. We looked at how it impacts people. You saw in the video how this young child is impacted. Long term, how is it? Short term, we know it's survival mode right now. Everybody's in survival mode, just trying to get out of the rubble, move out. You've seen pictures and videos of people not sleeping and all in the same room. And you've seen that tweet about that mother putting all her children in the same place. God forbid they die. They don't have to mourn the pain of each other. I mean, it just shows you what kind of trauma these people are experiencing in the moment. And short term, it's survival. Long term, we described what could happen later on. We have refugees who live here in Canada now. And I noticed this, and we talk about this, is that when they hear fireworks on Canada Day, there are some Syrian and Iraqi refugees and any refugees who've lived in war-torn countries. When they hear those fireworks, it's going to remind them of bombs, right? So you see long-term how it can impact you. It impacts you socially, how you interact and build trust with people, right? So what are your thoughts on that before we move on to the next part, Krista, in terms of how does it affect long-term?
Long-term, a lot of the things that you stated, there is a lot of evidence. You can find a lot of research that it does shorten people's life expectancy because the stress that they're dealing with. Right. Stress does impact the body. People who have experienced trauma, they do have they have higher rates of different like heart attacks, things like diabetes, right? High sugar, low sugar, malnutrition, sleep issues. Some of them, like some people, they come from these situations and they really, sometimes they overachieve. Sometimes there's a lot of overachievement, which I know sometimes people are like, how is overachievement a negative thing? But it can wear a person out.
Of course, burnout
is not burnout, and a person's value is not based on their output. But sometimes people want to prove
to themselves and others.
Prove to themselves and prove to others their value, their sense of their worth, their right, their dignity. Like, look what I do. Look, all this that happened to me, and nothing's holding me back. You see it especially among women in the refugee community or the immigrant community.
So much pressure on them.
So much pressure. They
make
are
up. Yeah.
What's that? The boss woman. I'm sorry, that is not a new phenomenon. That's like, I remember that when I was growing up in housing 30 years ago. The woman who came to Canada didn't speak English on a Friday, but she had a full-time job by Sunday with 8 kids. And she was cooking every day and helping her family back home. You would see her every payday going to the Western Union when it used to be at the hijab stores or the phone card stores. She would go get her phone card and she would send her, like, no matter what, it was getting done. But she didn't have time for herself. She didn't have time to
God
heal.
Bless her.
All her kids, bless her. Like, every day I think of that woman. All her kids went to university. All her kids pushed, but all of them kept that same overachievement.
Right.
And now you see she's 45. She's still looking good, but she's sick. She's tired.
Oh,
She has
bless her.
unexplained body aches because she didn't have the access to the services. She didn't have access to the support. And she still has time. She can, but sometimes people overachieve. Sometimes people don't talk about anything. They don't want to think about it at all. And you see it with the elders. Either they want to reminisce all the time or they want to just completely wipe it out because they don't see a value in discussing it.
And that's the thing, you see it also in the form of depression, the form of anxiety, a lot of what we discussed also in terms of the post-traumatic stress, paranoia. Yeah. There's a really interesting question in terms of, I guess, when it comes to the impact of it. I'm just going to post it here on the screen where Sayyid Raza Ali says, where does one draw a line between being a victim and playing a victim? What are your thoughts on that? That's an interesting question.
For me,
being and playing,
yeah.
because playing, and I think this has to do with playing a victim. You get attention when you're a victim, right? And then when
it's hard, and I will never. I am not a chair psychologist, that we used to call them at work. I cannot diagnose if someone is a victim or is playing a victim. That's not my role. The person defines for themselves. And if you see someone and you have someone in your life or your community that is, presenting, victim-like behavior, or they're experiencing a lot of trauma and they're, perhaps they could be very negative or they're requiring a lot of attention, you can do your part and walk on. You are not required to engage with anyone.
Exactly.
If it's not beneficial for you, if you feel people ask for attention when they need attention. Different people need different amounts of attention, like you see some kids, they need 100 hugs a day. And then you have other kids who are like, whoa, you hugged me on Monday. I'm okay.
That's enough.
That's enough.
It depends on the attachment and the bonding.
It depends on the attachment and the bonding. And we have to be careful if we're projecting our trauma or our issues onto that individual as well. If someone's really, playing the victim card in the sense that they want a lot of extras because of that, then that's their issue, and you need to kind of step out. The more attention they're getting for that behavior, they'll continue it. But I don't think we're really in a place that we can say, oh, that person's playing a victim, that person's an actual victim. This is the victim, this is not, because you don't know. Something very small for one person can be extremely traumatic.
Yeah.
We don't know, but you have to keep yourself safe in that. You have to know what your boundaries are. Is this a person I need to associate with? Is this someone that I need to strengthen my boundaries with? Because if it's making you feel negative, it's affecting you.
And you see here with the comment of Abdullah says that victim mentality can be very dangerous. Absolutely, because
it can be.
It's self-sabotaging, right? Playing the victim as well, and it doesn't really move you forward. There's a time where you need to be in that place, but then it could turn, and you can empower through the right supports and therapy to be a survivor, right?
And I think that's why it's important in our communities that we encourage our community members to access the right support, because sometimes they get stuck in victim. Because our communities reward victim very well.
Yes.
And that's okay, because other communities reward other behaviors that are not very good. And
every community has its idiosyncrasies.
It's just the way it is. But in my experience is people get stuck there because they're being rewarded there, and they're not being encouraged to move on from there.
Exactly.
So I think the victim mentality is extremely dangerous when we reward it negatively. When we reward it positively by giving it the attention that it requires,
the validation,
and then what you experienced was horrible, and what you're feeling now is horrible, and we need to find someone to help you identify your strategies and your coping skills to move on. And I think we have to be comfortable with identifying who in our community, whether it's a mental health professional, whether it's a physician, whether it's a sheikh, who can we refer people to get access to the appropriate supports, so that we don't kind of create that cycle of victim blaming, victim mentality, kind of like back and forth dynamic. We don't need that in our community.
Absolutely. And based on that, let's take a look at, how does this also impact the diaspora here, especially those of us right now, we are not, let's say, from Palestine per se, right? But we are witnessing and seeing all of this. And I can personally say this from the people that I've connected with over the last week, and you can attest to this too, Krista, that people are feeling frustrated. They're feeling sad and devastated. You're feeling angry as well. And these are all valid and justified emotions. I would say they're normal human responses to what you are witnessing. And especially when we're in different parts of the world where we feel helpless in doing anything. What we saw yesterday, for example, worldwide practically, and even today is continuing, we are seeing the protests that are happening, right? And this is a place, or, you know, hopefully a safe space. It wasn't in France, as we saw yesterday, because they were attacked as though they were in Palestine, right? But you see, these are the spaces where people are letting out a lot of what is happening in their systems, right? A lot of the built up anger and stress, because what happens then is when you are experiencing all of these emotions, there's a built up and release of stress hormones in your body. And if you don't take care of that well, and inshallah, we'll show you how to cope with that at the end of our session today. But we see, for those of us outside, how does that impact us from what you have seen? So I've given my view. What's your view on that, Krista? Because I just realized the time, and we still got a few questions we want to get through, and people are also sending.
Well, so, it's very difficult for people who both aren't from those countries or who are living in diaspora from those countries, because you know, there's a lot of everything that you described, the frustration,
families and friends back home.
But there's also survivor's guilt. Because a lot of people who are here, it is very hard. Like, there's the joke, the Iraqi comedian, he was talking about it, that how do you know someone's Palestinian? Because as soon as you meet them, even before they say their name, they say, I'm Palestinian. Because they want to bring in the memory of who they are.
An identity.
On this. This is who we are. We can't let this go. And a huge part of that is related to survivor's guilt and the shame that you're not suffering with your people as well, and the need to try to do something to help them. But you know, the protests are very powerful. Protests get a lot of stuff done. A lot of people think it doesn't. Protests do. We know they do. Historically, they do.
Well, we've seen it just last year. Look with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Like, what is that?
They didn't give up, and they invested their pain and the frustration, and again, the intergenerational trauma and that hurt into their movement and into the protest. And they were really open with how to be an ally. And I think that's important for us who are outside of the community or live in other countries and aren't. From what not just about Palestine, but in any issue like this relating to trauma, is how to be a good ally, how to support people.
Exactly.
But again, like you said, when you're outside, you still have to express what's going on. You still need to access services for your support and your mental health.
And us, we're therapists, right? And I can tell you this week, it was very hard at work for me personally. I contacted my bosses and told them, I have to tell you that it's really hard getting through the day. And I'm feeling pain in my heart. And I expressed that to my colleagues, and they were very loving and supporting. And, you know, we're thinking of you and everybody, and thank you for letting us know. And I feel safe in where I work to say something like that. I know not everybody can do that, but it's important.
You put time in that, and you expressed it, and you took bravery. It is bravery to express that, because people don't want to hear it. People don't. It was hard. Like, maybe you feel comfortable, but like there was probably a little bit of apprehension. Like, I'm going to bring up the topic.
Well, yeah, but I've done it a few times now. I did it with the New Zealand bombing. I did it last year when the maternity ward was impacted, attacked in Afghanistan. And I think it's important that we learn how to express that. And perhaps being a therapist, I'm all about expressing your emotions and stuff. But the support I got back, they're like, you know, they messaged me privately, some of the colleagues in the group, and just being heard was helpful. And I have to be honest, you know, and let's, aside from our work, we have first world problems here that make us very far removed from what is happening in other parts of the world, when we have to get gas in the car, pick up the kids, get the groceries, doctors, Medicaid, COVID, the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. So caught up in that, sometimes you become so far removed. And this is part of being desensitized with what is happening in the other parts of the world, right? And so it's really important to take a moment, and we'll get into it. We keep jumping to strategies, but I think it's really important to get through this. And then there's a great question here that is put was sent to by an audience member. I'm going to put it both on Instagram as well as Facebook. And the question is, what are the effects of suppressing harmful memories of how to overcome? We'll get into more details, but it's a great question that was sent in. How, what are the effects of suppressing? Because that's another thing people do, is that they don't want to deal with it. Like you said, they don't want to see it, right? They block it. But that's also, you need to get through the day kind of thing, right? But what would happen long term?
Well, I think it's important because I think the suppressing emotions, it often goes a little bit with the overachieving or the not wanting to be a victim. It's that concept of just, you see it everywhere, keep calm and move on, or shake it off.
Carry on.
Just, step over it. It doesn't matter how many times you're knocked down. What matters is how many times you get up. And all of these are true. And all of these are valid. Like, I'm not diminishing these, but when we're only using these, but we're not practicing other strategies or accessing supports to overcome these memories, we're never going to move past them. And we're going to see it in a lot of different ways. You're going to see a lot of physical and mental health, like sleep disruption, relationship issues. And, you're going to see stresses in work and school. It's going to be harder to work. It's going to be harder to study. Eating well, you're going to see a lot of really unhealthy eating habits. Yes. Overindulging, not feeding your body what it needs.
It could lead to eating disorders as well,
it can, because sometimes when we're not taking control of one aspect of our life because we can't, or we feel we can't, then we're going to overcompensate by using other strategies which aren't positive and aren't going to support us. A lot of people, sometimes they lose faith, or they have struggles in their spirituality, or
that's a huge one. Let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at that. And there's a great question that we have on Instagram that it looks like we're getting some really good questions. Mashallah.
Good questions. People are really opening up, and
alhamdulillah. This is what we hope to do, right, in this discussion. So let's take a look at this one here. For those who experience some kind of trauma, and what comes to mind for me is the spiritual abuse. Right? That comes to mind is when they experience, and inshallah, I'm going to be doing a program through some kind of medium on this topic of spiritual abuse, which is much needed, especially in our communities, to discuss, to understand what it's about and the implications. Because sometimes we think, it's just like a sheikh, a scholar, or a priest who sexually assaulted somebody. And yes, it could be, but that's not what it is specifically only, right? So, but this is what comes to mind is somebody, let's say in this type of scenario, and we've seen this often, where they're taking advantage of somebody in a position of power who happens to be using religion, okay? So not themselves per se, a scholar, a sheikh, a priest, or a rabbi, or whomever, but somebody in the position of power who uses. So it could be a parent, it could be a partner, it could be coworker, it could be a friend, right? And so they would bring religion to shame, to hurt, to abuse in the name of religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity or Judaism, or in the name of any faith. And so what happens is, of course, this person, the victim at the time, is abused. Although they may survive this, they may have triggers. And I've seen this time and time again, whether it's a relationship with partners where the husband or the wife are using religion, and you're not listening to your husband, you're not this and that. Meanwhile, they're doing everything, but it's just because this is a narcissistic, son of a gun who's using their position of power to be nice and not use profanity, because I definitely use profanity in these situations, but I'm respecting myself, inshallah. This was one of my things that I promised myself, the Shahr Ramadan, was to work on my language, because I do have. Anyhow, off topic here, but these situations bring that out in you. We're human. So
it does.
Yeah. So then this situation, what happens here when we take a look at harmful memories and suppression and how it impacts you, is then the person blames the religion, blames the origin, and moves away from faith. You've seen people blame God, astaghfirullah, and I've seen women take off their hijab. I've seen young men and women, just completely lose faith because this person who was, let's say, a figure of faith to them, or representing the faith rather, hurt them and disappointed them. And you know what, when we look at it from the psychological perspective and the way we've described it, they have every justifiable sense to feel that way. It is a valid feeling. But then you talk about they leave the faith because of that. It's because it's a trauma. It's a re-triggered trauma.
It's the trauma, and I think it's really important, especially now, because like you heard the little girl when she was expressing in the video, or there was a comment, I saw a couple people comment to say, why does this keep happening in Muslim countries? Or when she said like it's because they hate us because we're Muslim. And I'm not like evaluating these statements at all, because these are people's feelings, and it's not for me to say what's true or not true at all. And my personal opinions could be in line, but again, we're not discussing that. But what's important to remember is when this type of trauma happens, and when this response comes in response to the faith, it could be the loss of faith or the crisis of faith is a really common phrase, is that we as a community have to be comfortable and have to be ready with our like spiritual first aid to be there to support people through that.
Spiritual first aid.
We do have to have it. It's okay. I'm going to be a little bit personal here. My first son, he lost his mother to cancer as a child. He doesn't know her. Bless him. And he's 17 in a week or so. So it's a very difficult age. And it's very difficult when you don't have that connection. And there is definitely survivor's guilt going on there. And he has said, why did God do this? Why, if God is merciful, why did he do this? And I have to let him express it. I don't have to let him sit there for an hour and be chanting these things, but I have to let him express it, and I have to be comfortable with him and say, why do you think God would do this to you? Why are you putting this on God? Things happen, and walk him through it and access him support and ask him, how can I help you feel comfortable in your faith? How can you access your faith to support you in this time? And I have to be available for him. And I can't tell him, no, astaghfirullah, we don't say this, we're Muslim, we don't question. No, he's not questioning God. He's questioning the trauma that happened. And because the trauma doesn't have a name, the trauma doesn't have a face, the trauma is so insurmountable, he's going to lay it at the feet of the person, or not the person, because God's not a person, but at the one thing he can identify, which is God. So we have to be dignified, like this girl, dignified in our response, and say, you're allowed to be upset, you're allowed to feel overwhelmed and frustrated. You know, how can we, what is the issue, what is the trauma, and what is the faith? Like, we have to separate the trauma from the faith. And that's why we have to be comfortable when a spiritual abuse is going on, saying, then we're not going to access this person A, B, C, D, you know, Syed, Sheikh, random auntie, could be. Who can we access in the community for some spiritual first aid? Who can we call up? Like, I'm sure like there's a couple people I've met in my life who were giving spiritual first aid and they didn't know it. And we have to be okay with evaluating what we can do more than just, we don't question, we don't do that, pray more, fast more, read more dua. Yes, all these things are good.
That's part of it, but it's deeper.
But it's not the only answer. It's not because when the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was experiencing the greatest traumas in his life, he gave us these examples. He didn't go on week-long fasts and vigils. He turned simply to God. He just turned simply to God and to those around him who loved and he trusted, like his family, his companions, the imams, and he had his support. He didn't rail against God when he lost his closest friends, but he also didn't go on 10-day long fasts and staying up until 4 o'clock in the morning. He did that later, once he had passed the trauma and he had passed the crisis, and he knew he evaluated what his soul needed to get back to the spiritual point or faithful point that it was before. But he turned to people who could give him that comfort that he needed in the time, and he turned simply to God.
And he did, but he also used what God gave him. For example, with what I've read and understood, when Sayyidah Khadija salam passed away, he found comfort with his daughter, Sayyidah Fatima salam, right? Because she became the mother of her father, right? So God sends us through these different avenues, the support and help, right? So thank you so much, Krista, for bringing that up, and definitely, inshallah, in the future, we'll connect more on this topic. Let's jump now to, I know there's some really amazing questions here that have been brought up. Thank you for those who are sending. I just want to quickly answer this question before we go on to the next one. I'm cognizant of time, and I hear your daughter in the background. So trauma
I'll just check on her in a moment. No, someone's not showing his Legos, so.
Oh dear, and the Cheetos ran out.
But she has to work through it too. And then that's like, for me, I could get really anxious and scared right now,
Right.
like
Yeah.
my child, but I do know she's safe. I do know what the issue is, Cheetos and Legos. But it's okay for me to take my time with you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Bless you. Mama needs her intellectual time too, right? So trauma work in therapy, Sayed Ali Jafari is asking, trauma work in therapy for a lot of clients is a long-term treatment. Do you think there's a danger that the therapy keeps them stuck in the past? It could, depending on the therapy and the therapist.
Yeah.
It truly is. I've had clients where they go to one therapist and it's not working. They go to another and it works. Yeah. So it's simply put, I think it really depends on the person. What are your thoughts quickly on that?
I think people need to be really vulnerable and open with themselves, not necessarily anybody else, but with themselves and God, what they need from therapy and what their goals are in therapy. And when they meet the therapist, they need to be comfortable and kind of interviewing the therapist a little bit and being like, not like, how quick are you going to fix me? But being like,
long term.
These are my goals. These are my goals. And I understand these goals are long term.
Right.
But do you think that we're going to be a good fit?
Absolutely.
And, I think
a lot of people blame the therapist, or sorry, they blame the therapy on the therapist. Same thing when it comes to spiritual abuse, right? In a way, the interesting comparison. Yeah.
I've had a lot of clients. I've been seeing a therapist for 4 years and I'm still not over my issues. Well, the therapist is not there to fix your issues.
No, they're there to support you. Right.
The therapist is just there to provide the support and access to a range of options that you may not know that you have. That's their goal. And if your therapist isn't providing you with a range of options in the sense of kind of like reframing and reflecting, that it's okay to say, you know what, I don't think this is working for either of us, and move on.
We've had that.
I think it's important too that not everyone has access to insurance to support long-term therapy. So I do think it's really important for people who want to access this support to be open to trying centers for therapy, like different kinds of centers, because they do have sliding scales.
Right.
And there are grants available for long-term therapy, and be really open with the therapist and saying, like, this is kind of like my budget. There's nothing wrong with, if you're going to buy a car, you're going to say, this is my budget, and you're going to stick within that budget. This is your health. There's nothing wrong with being upfront. And therapists are very open. It's usually on most of their pages. It's usually very open, but don't cut your therapy off short because of an issue with fees or insurance. I don't have insurance. A lot of us don't. Be open with it. And don't be scared to try somewhere else. Like in Ottawa, we have a place called Catholic Family Services.
Yes.
It is a faith-based counseling service. It is not Catholic-based. It provides that if you're interested.
It's just
in
called
it,
like even the Jewish Family Services, the Jewish Family Services, and we're already jumping to the last question on this, but that's okay.
But for me, the reason why I think it's important is sometimes we stay with therapists based on things like comfort, fees, these things, and not to be scared to look somewhere different. You're going to find, God will surprise you. Where He shows you in your path.
And there's also now, given the world of the pandemic, there's been all this amazing supports online as well.
Online,
and free counseling as well. And you just need to check out our posts that I'm always posting, and people send me questions, and even if you have questions for where you can go, just to pop me a DM me, and then I will send you a list of therapists, including free counseling, inshallah. So on to the next part now. I think we've thoroughly examined trauma from the context that we're looking at today, and taking a look at it, all of that, inshallah. Of course, there's so much more. In fact, just yesterday, there was an online conference in the UK that was looking at the impact of this type of aggression on mental health of Palestinians. And that's part of what inspired me to say, hey, you're not feeling of helplessness and not being able to do anything. In fact, you do have the ability to do something to help. And this is what we're going to take a look at in the second part here. And we actually were going to have my friend from Toronto, psychotherapist Zainab Abdullah, joining us. She couldn't make it this afternoon. However, she is joining us, so to speak, in this video that she had put out, which also inspired me to, let's do something about this, on how to take care of your symptoms when you're dealing with the stress during this time. So I'm going to put up this video right now. It's very short. And then Krista and I are going to get into strategies, how to cope with it. And then Shala will be providing you with resources. So if you do have questions for the next part, we have here, just a quick quick question before I get into that. So Dr. Randour is asking, as a psychotherapist, do you have a preferred method in treating anxiety, depression, or suicidal thoughts? This is a very great generic question, and it truly depends on the person that's sitting in front of me, their history. We have to do a full mental health assessment in terms of seeing what is the history, genetic factors, et cetera, et cetera. We do a full history of that, then we can determine. So I can't really answer, do I have a preferred method? It truly depends on the situation. And just like you would ask a doctor, you know, how would you treat this cold or how would you treat that? There's so many different ways depending on what it is. So same thing goes here when we take a look at that. Thank you for sending in that question. That is absolutely really important. And Krista, people are saying they really love your energy. It's very inspiring. I know this, which is why I brought you on this with me. And inshallah, we can do more because you have such a wealth of knowledge. God bless you.
Bless you, bless you. But we talk every day. That's why you share so much with me. My goodness.
Bless you, dear sister. All right, so I'm going to put up here on the screen for those of you who are following on YouTube and Facebook. Those of you on Instagram, I will share this. I've already shared it, but I will share it on my story again. This is from I forget the title. I have to go check her page, but it's Zainab Abdullah. She is a therapist in the Toronto area. She is originally Iraqi, Canadian, and she is fabulous, mashallah. So I'm going to put this right up on the screen, and let's take a moment to look at that. So, all right, Krista's going to.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to get on here very briefly to share a few tips that can help you regulate your nervous system. It's been a pretty heavy week for many of us, considering what's going on currently in Palestine. And this in and of itself could really activate us and obviously turn on the stress response in many of our nervous systems, alongside the fact that many of us actually carry intergenerational stress. And many of us come from communities who have been resisting and rising against imperialist and oppressive systems. And so this is really why it's super important to regulate your nervous system as you work with the anger that you have that's justified, maybe the sadness, the grief that's coming up, and the sense of helplessness. Obviously, this goes without saying that channeling a lot of that energy will help when we're protesting or donating and posting. At the same time, it's really important to also regulate the stress response in the body. And so I'm going to share about 4 body-centered practices. The first one is going to be breath. And so really working on extending your breath. So just long exhales. Inhaling on a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding, and then exhaling on a count of 4, 3, 2, 1, or longer than that. The second is solid surfaces. So you want to make sure if you are scrolling or things are coming up for you, see if you can connect with the seat underneath you. So just pressing down on your sit bones and feeling the solidity of the seat underneath you. Or going and making contact, just making contact with the backrest or with the wall behind you. So just even noticing the support the wall could provide, or even if you're lying down and the support the floor could provide. Third is using any kind of weight that's comforting against your torso. So just pressing down. So this could be a pillow, this could be a blanket, and just waiting and listening and just noticing what's happening in the body and if things settle down for us a little bit. The solidity, the fourth one, is that you can find solidity in the body as well. So just pressing up and down. And just noticing if things settle for you as well. I'm sending you lots of meditations of ease at this time. And I hope that you are taking care of your nervous system as we work to regulate some of the stress of the intensity of the injustice that we are witnessing. Thank you.
All right. That was great. A lovely video from Zainab. So I've got those of you on Instagram, you can go to al.mindful.therapist, and it is this video here that you will find this whole little clip that we had put on right now. So you can find that there and engage in. And she's got a great page full of other strategies. And yeah, and she does a lot of mindfulness meditations as well. So I truly recommend her work. For those of you who want therapy, this is a wonderful support that you can access online as well. Yeah, and she's really a classy woman, very well-trained, well-spoken, lovely person to work with, and I highly recommend for those of you in the GTA, in the Toronto area, or even any of you outside in Canada, I would assume. I'm not sure if she does international. You can contact her and check. So again, you can find her on al.mindful.therapist. She's got a website as well, and she works with other people. So highly recommend that as a resource. Now let's take a look at some of the strategies that she did speak about. And she talked about being aware of your heightened awareness during this time, which was exactly what we talked about right at the beginning, right? Where we talked about how there's a release of stress hormones in your bodies, that the cortisol, right? And you need that, like for the flight or fight response, like you need to be part of that. And those of you who attended the protest over the last few days, you probably had a release of those stress hormones getting out of your body and probably felt adrenaline and endorphins released into your system, feeling so good after shouting out and expressing and getting rid of the stress and the anger that you felt by using your voice in the protest, perhaps. Those of you who work with lobbying, working with people of influence and power, because it's, like you said earlier, absolutely the protests have a huge impact in terms of putting our voices out there and condemning violent acts. At the same time, it's not just protests that make movements. It is the work that is done behind the scenes, right? That can really push and put pressure on our members of parliament, people of influence to do that, diplomatic ties, et cetera, because that's, you know, just screaming and holding banners, it's not going to work just like that, right? Simply. Yeah. But when you do it collectively, I think there's a huge power in that as well. You know, the collectiveness of people and supporting and seeing people of other cultures and different backgrounds coming. It's inspiring. It truly was. And this was my personal experience of it yesterday. And, you know, you feed off of that. Again, when you come back to taking care of your emotions, taking care of yourself, and what does that mean, right? We have to take a step back and take a look at that a little bit more, right? So, Krista, what are some of the strategies after taking a look at this, you know, which is great with what Zainab has showed us, but what are some other strategies that you can tell us or you're familiar with that you've used over the years with clients and yourself, and to regulate, to manage stress response? Yeah. You know, with the intergenerational, the resistance, like we said, the anger, the grief, the helplessness. What are some thoughts you have around that, please?
Well, primarily my work is with children and families. So I do work with individuals who are older, but as a child and youth work counselor, we do primarily work with children. So one of the most important things that we do with children is we help them kind of identify when they're feeling the heightened sense of emotion, right? When they feel this going on. So it's called HALT. So it's like a movement with kids. It's HALT. And like, it's like, because, you know, HALT is like an old fashioned word for stop. But it's because you ask the child, okay, in this moment to help you, are you hungry?
Right.
Because hunger triggers trauma, because hunger is a physical pain.
Of course. It's part of your essential needs, right? That are not met, that can trigger. Yeah.
So are you feeling hungry in this moment? Yeah, it's a good one. You can find it a lot. It's
I'm going to write it here. So H, hunger, right?
Yeah, H is hunger. Are you angry? Did something happen to anger you? Are you lonely? Are you feeling lonely in this minute? Do they have a need, like when Zainab demonstrated the physical, like you're giving yourself a self-hug at that moment. Are they lonely? Absolutely, or are they tired?
Right.
Are they tired? So it's hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And it's really easy for them to remember. Even the little one who just came in, like number 4, when I went to see her, I asked her, like, are you hungry? She said, no. Are you angry? No. Are you lonely? Yes. She wanted her balloon.
Oh,
so she was able to identify that. But for a young child, sometimes something like that, it is in that moment that it can help them freeze the moment. It can help them kind of get their balance again. You don't always need to, like, I know, like for example, my husband has expression in Arabic, like hit the iron when it's hot. When there's a problem, you deal with it then. It's not always that. Sometimes we
No.
just need to stabilize. Do we need to be
Process.
fed?
Yeah,
Do
we need to
a hug?
process it.
Do
Yeah.
we need something for comfort? Do we need to sleep? If you're experiencing trauma, you're most likely experiencing a lot of sleep disruption. Either you're sleeping way too
Absolutely.
much
Yes.
and you're not getting what you need,
Yeah, to
because
deny.
oversleep is
Yeah.
not good for you,
No.
or you're not sleeping enough, you're experiencing insomnia. So there's the HALT strategy, which can really help, especially kids in trauma. Police officers use it a lot, paramedics use it a lot to kind of
Yeah,
stop
not
it
just
in the moment.
kids, not just
Yeah.
kids, for adults as well.
It's very useful.
Thanks for reminding me of this. I'm going to use that with my daughter and myself too, to remind. I'm one of the hangry.
Like,
I'm one of the hangry ones, you
yeah.
know?
You know, I think I'm all of them at times. And I think that's okay, because sometimes, like you see the jokes where people are like, I'm a Gemini, because we don't believe in astrology, like really, but you know, I'm a Gemini, so I'm like this. And sometimes people will say, well, when I'm frustrated, I act like this. But we have to remember that there's not like just one response to trauma. There's not one response, because we're going to respond for the need. So I use that. In the breathing with kids, especially younger kids, and even sometimes young teens, they need the visual. So we often do something called jellyfish breathing. So it's the same idea of deep breathing, but it's just to give them, or balloon, that's a popular one here, like the visual to focus on. So they start with their hands really small, and then you walk them through the breath of, they want to open up the jellyfish all the way. So they focus on the hand, they're pulling all the air deep into the belly, they're extending the belly, because often we do the opposite. We suck in the belly when we're pulling air in. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but sometimes when you're trying to like get a sleeping bag on, you suck your belly in, but you're actually sucking air in. So when people are in crisis and they're doing this, they're restricting the diaphragm. Kids do this a lot. They start to hyperventilate. They're trying to bring air in, but the tummy is becoming restricted. So we do the jellyfish, you open the jellyfish up, and then the jellyfish sees the fish, he catches it, he eats it, he pulls it in, and they exhale. Or you can do the balloon. Some kids like the balloon, but most kids like the jellyfish. Jellyfish is really popular. It helps them. They're focusing on their hands. They're focusing on their breath. You can correct the breath. Oh, the jellyfish didn't open his belly all the way, because you can see they're not extending the diaphragm. The shoulders are still tense, and you can walk them through that breathing. Because if you tell a child, especially a child in crisis, just calm down and do a deep breath, the kid is going to either shut down and be like, this person doesn't have the patience to work with me, or they're going to start to do the opposite. And there's a lot of really good tools online for that. Well, that's why police officers keep teddy bears in the car, or we saw in Palestine, a lot of the paramedics have teddy bears.
Yes.
Like the technique where Zainab showed to ground yourself, the physical holding.
Yes.
Like, you know, that's why some children don't, if your child still has a teddy bear at 8, 9, 10, 11, please don't shame them. Especially if it's a child.
I still have. I collect them.
People have body pillows now, you know?
Yes, it changes. Yeah. I got both. And
I think it's especially important for our children. Like my daughter is muhajibah, alhamdulillah, she does wear hijab, the older one, not this one. She's 10, and she is restricted in who she can and cannot touch. There is restriction for us.
Of course.
And even for our young men, there is restriction, but we have a need for comfort. And when you're experiencing trauma, and that's why sometimes people make unhealthy choices, and they blame the faith. Oh, Islam says I can't hug. Islam says nothing about that. Islam is pro-hug.
Yes.
Islam is
but
just
with
like
whom?
Selective with who you hug.
Yes.
Selective with your hug. So it's important to, especially with kids or youth, kind of be comfortable in being like, do you need a teddy bear? Do you need a body pillow? What can we do to help you get that physical firmness that when you hug the pillow? You see it in COVID, they were making hands out of gloves. They were filling it with warm water and putting it on the hands of people who are unconscious so that they feel the holding of the hand.
Oh dear.
So sometimes with children, we fill them like a glove with rice, and you can sew the glove up, just a dollar store glove, you fill it with rice. You can put some lavender if you want. They can hold it, or you can spray that glove with water and put it in the microwave, and then they can put it and it's warm. And they can hold it until it cools down, and you can walk them through with it and be like, as it's cooling down, you can feel you're cooling down. Are you doing the jellyfish? Okay. Are you doing your hugs? Because kids need to be walked through it.
Absolutely.
A great resource is CHEO. Anyone can go onto it. It's CHEO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario.
Here, let me put it up here.
the Mind Masters. It's called Mind Masters. It's one word, so Mind Masters. And it's free, so you don't have to pay for it, and you can access it from anywhere. And it's videos like what Zainab just did, but for children and youth.
Yeah.
And it walks them through self-regulation. So they have one called Jellyfish Toes and Spaghetti Nose and all this stuff. And you can access it. And it is accessed, like I've worked with people overseas who were using it with children in the UN camps in Lebanon, the Syrian children. They were translating it and walking it through them. So it helps them do kind of muscle relaxation. So these are like some resources. Kids, you need to have the resources, and you don't have to pay a lot of money for them.
No.
And I think all of these are useful for your spiritual first aid and your support of the children. But kids, you do need to have some practical tools, because like, I know if I'm being upset, if someone just tells me, just shake it off, walk it off, just work, I'm not going to do it. But imagine a child.
Toughen up. Yeah. Yeah. That must be rough.
Like from the top of my head, these are what we do, because the child has to be calm to be able to do the work. The child has to be calm to be able to work through the trauma.
processing. Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to do the same thing 3-4 times. That's okay.
Until they get it. Yeah. And then for adults, when we take that further in terms of, like you said, the physical touch and so on. So there's a variety of things that we need to look at in terms of the emotional, finding ways how to cope and deal with our nervous system and regulating them, like we were saying, right? Looking at the physical, getting rid of the stress. And this is something we talk about often. We get rid of the stress hormones in our bodies, right? Mentally, looking at your thoughts, looking at your triggers, right? Mindfulness practices, things like that, right? And socially, turn to the ones that that you can get support from, because sometimes you cannot get the support from people around you. Maybe you have friends who are so impacted by trauma themselves or have been through these wars that, and I've seen this with some of my friends versus, friends who were immigrants versus those who grew up here. I find such a difference in them. Sometimes I find the ones who have grown up in these war zones, they are more, I wouldn't say, maybe tougher, tougher skinned, more desensitized, more like, so what? This happens all the time. This is not new attitude. Like, people die all the time. I get that sometimes from them when I'm like, we got to do something with this, that kind of attitude. And then you have those who are very different because of the way they've grown up and saying, oh, wow, the different support there. So sometimes we have to be really aware in terms of who you engage in when it comes to this, if they're going to give you that support or not. Sometimes you're not going to get the support from the people you expect it from, right? Yeah. So it's really important. Maybe you can find other support groups, like in the protests that people have attended. Now you have this network of support around you that you can connect with these people who believe in the same thing that you do, are passionate about it. And you're more likely to be aligned that way, as opposed to somebody who just themselves are not going to feel what you are feeling, right? So it's really important to have that in mind, right? And I wanted to ask you, Krista, if you wanted to add anything more to that part.
No, I was just going to say, just to be careful with yourself as well when you're providing supports, because compassion fatigue is real.
Yes.
It is difficult, and it is, and especially in times like this. And I think that sometimes happens with people. They either become hyper compassionate,
yes,
or it's very difficult, because there have been times over the past couple of days where I've had to turn off my phone.
Yes, same here. Yes,
because it is too much, but because sometimes I found myself being like, well, what do you expect? And then I was like, whoa. And I had to check myself, because the images were constant.
Yes.
And we're getting phone calls from back home saying, this is happening. The young Lebanese man who was shot at the border, he's from the village next to ours.
Oh, geez.
So then I was calling back home, is everything. And then we get hyperized. And then even I see this with my husband. My husband experienced civil war, and he experienced displacement, and he
blessed him,
left their home, alhamdulillah. But he's very open with, I have compassion fatigue. I have a difficult time sometimes. And I think it's okay if you're open about it. And you have to look at your friends and say, I need these friends. We're not saying cut those friends out. No, those are still good friends.
Yes,
but you have to sometimes you have to change your diet. You have to add new things into it. Sometimes you have to add new friends. You have to add new experiences. And you have to be open to what do I need to be healthy and safe. now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a really important one when you're talking about compassion fatigue and boundaries for yourself as well. And when you turn off the phone or stop looking at messages that people send you from the bombardment of what's happening, it doesn't mean that you don't care. It just means you need a moment. You know, and you are allowed to take that moment. You are allowed to go treat yourself and give compassion. It doesn't, and people probably will feel guilty. You know, how are we doing that? And then this year we've seen it, and I was one of those people as well, as, you know, right before Eid, this all took place, is how can we celebrate Eid knowing what is happening here? You know, what's happening. And then we have to understand, what does celebrating Eid mean? Celebrating Eid, I think people have taken it out of context in terms of parties and so on and so forth. Celebrating Eid is honoring the accomplishment of what you have accomplished this month spiritually, right? With staying away from sin. I think we need to reevaluate things, right? Of course, it's about connecting with our families and all of that in tradition. Sorry, just a second, Krista. However, people have, I think, taken it out of context in terms of understanding, and everyone's allowed to have their own ideas of what Eid is. But when you look at it from a spiritual perspective, it truly is honoring those and us who have abstained from sin, who worked really hard spiritually as much as they can, you know, given restrictions and limits and sickness and all of that kind of stuff. But there comes a point where you feel guilty for, you know, surviving, perhaps those who survived, those who are blessed and privileged in other parts of the world, right? And I think I've seen a few really nice tweets of supportive tweets, to say it that way, of some speakers and scholars who've said, you know what, you are allowed to take that time with your family. You are allowed to congregate within limits, of course, of the pandemic, and honor and spend time and, you know, have the food and dress in the new clothes as the customs are, but also doing the honor of remembering those who cannot do that and what they are doing as well this year, right? So there's that also to consider this year. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I'm 100% in line with this. I think this year for us, it really reminded us as a family, like the word Eid, it means a return, right? Return. You're returning to, we went through a trial in Shahr Ramadan where we abstained, where we tested ourselves, where we, you know, enjoyed good and forbade evil, which we're supposed to do every day. But this was a month of focus, and where the gates of heaven were open and where the devil was locked up, right? And then we see that the devil is not this, you know, little guy in a red suit with a fork. The devil is within us when we make these choices. And it was really, really powerful. We don't know why things happen. They happen the way they happen. That this occurred in Shahr Ramadan. These events occurred in Shahr Ramadan. Why? We have to ask ourselves why. What are we returning to? Right. Are we leaving this month and leaving all of this good work and all these deeds and all these blessings behind and returning to what we were doing before? Or are we returning to what is the correct method of living our life? And there's nothing wrong with celebrating Eid when we go back to the basics. And I think a lot of us lose the basics. I think this is a great time to invite a convert into your life as a friend, because a lot of them, maybe they're still kind of getting the basic understandings of Eid. They don't have the cultural trappings of Eid. Because family, Eid is not a fashion show. Eid is not a feast in the sense, it is a feast of, you know, love, and a feast of eating during the day. It is not a day that you should throw food out. You just spent a month of abstaining and thinking of people without. We should not be wasting. We should not be posting videos of huge gifts or cash. Like my children are saying, like, I gave them like a small thing, and they're like, but Mama, so-and-so got $150 for fasting. And I'm like, well, maybe you got 150 good deeds. We don't know. But the kids are, you know, like, and it's
they're missing the point.
We're missing it. And
it's almost like it's falling. Wrong. It's almost like it's falling into the Christmas propaganda. What we see,
like, I come from this culture of Christmas being the most wonderful time of the year, where people max out their credit cards, and then that's why January and February are called the blue months, because you're looking at the bills and you're struggling to cards. So the Eid now, there's nothing wrong with celebrating it. There's nothing wrong with praying for those who are oppressed, because we do not forget, especially on the Eid, we do the dua of the oppressed. But why in that day we don't send, instead of, we can't wear the fancy outfits at a big congregational anyways, send the
No.
money to the
Those in need right now.
overseas.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
need.
Yes.
Do an extra prayer and offer it. With this
Yes.
little girl, God bless her, Rahaf Al-Masri, she's 6 years old.
Dear.
Oh, she's passed. God bless her soul. She's in
God bless
heaven
her
now. We
soul.
know this. But why not offer prayer for her, for others who are suffering in her way, for her family? Please comfort them. Please
Absolutely.
free them. Take the time and role model that for your children, because then when they're in a moment of faith crisis, they're
Yes.
going to go back in that memory that hopefully you will keep repeating.
Inshallah,
So they're
for
gonna
positive
remember it.
reinforcement. Yeah.
Positive reinforcement, and they're going to
Right.
say, when we're in a moment of need, this is what we do. When we're feeling struggle, this is what we do.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, when I'm unhappy, I go buy this. When I'm unhappy, I make a big party. When I'm unhappy, I surround myself with people I don't know.
Exactly. Exactly.
So celebrate and be happy, but thank God in that happiness, and remember
Yes.
those who are oppressed, because there is not a day that we're not supposed to remember them, and we don't know why this is happening. We can't forget them anywhere. We can't. These girls who are
Bless you, yeah.
studying, like each day when we see anything we can do to help a girl study and progress,
Yes.
we should,
Because she's the
read.
cornerstone of our society, of what she's going to
raises the
contribute.
children.
Yeah.
She raises the children.
The next generation.
The first verses given were read.
Aqra. Yeah.
Read, and like now I have, like, it give you goosebump when you say that.
Yeah.
This girl, they were just trying to read. So when you open your Quran, think of them and say that to the
Right.
kids. When I opened this blessed book today, I think of those girls who were, and then be like, the kids are going to say, you know what, really, Mama, that's what you're thinking about? And you're going to be like, yeah. You know what, when I opened this book today, I remember the Quran that they found at the bottom of the building burnt, but this surah was safe. How about we read that one today and think about it, and show them how to turn to the faith. Show them that the Eid is a day of faith. It's not a party day. It's a day of faith.
And that's the thing. It's like it's turned into this huge, mockery of what this month was all about.
It's become a rave. It's become a rave.
Yeah.
That's what it is
it's
now.
A
There's
fad,
music,
and
there's parties,
yeah,
and there's
yeah.
always
It's
food.
it's the complete opposite of what this whole month was all about, and especially this year,
in this time,
especially at this time, and how you truly have to celebrate the accomplishments, the personal ones that you have, but being grateful and mindful of what you do have, and how to support. This whole month was also about helping others and how to continue in the spirit of what we are taught from the Prophet and the Ahl Bayt alayhim as-salam to continue throughout the year, right? And it's so vital we teach our kids that. The fact that they're already looking at, how the Christmas, the gifts, now they're looking at the Eid gifts as something, how much I got, and look at the new outfits, and look, you can revel in that.
Now we have a tree now.
Tree, and I'm conflicted with that. We
have to hold on to what is good and forbid what is evil. SubhanAllah, we couldn't do Eid prayer this year, but we could do a protest this year.
You know what? You're absolutely right.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I have a crystal ball or I'm seeing anything at all. I want to be really clear, but I want to say that when that couldn't happen, I for a moment I said, I wonder why. I'm going to be I was talking in my moment after my prayer, I was saying, I'm going to be a little bit facetious here, Lord. What are you trying to prevent happening in that moment, and what are you trying to create?
SubhanAllah.
We couldn't do the fashion show, but what can we do now? And SubhanAllah, that's what it's become. And I'm sorry, I know, so I'm not saying look good, no problem looking good. Look good.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
We did on Eid. Yeah.
But there's been many years that I've gone with my children, and there's outfits that are not, you cannot pray in.
No.
And the outfits are being
much less modest hijab clothes.
And then it's confusing for our kids. And then they're confused. And we're saying, do this, but don't do this, but do this, but do
absolutely.
So something maybe not good was prevented for us, and something better was given to us.
Ahsanti.
This March yesterday, I had to work. We have a family business. I had to work.
Bless you.
But I was on there, and I saw your posts. I was watching you the whole time, everyone.
Bless
and you
you.
see the signs. And you see the people as a family coming out.
Absolutely.
Where before,
there was solidarity.
Doing their own thing. People are coming as a family. Something good for you. You think, what is it, the verse? Something that you may think is good for you is
عسى أن تكرهون شيئا وهو خير لكم عسى أن تحبون شيئا وهو خير لكم.
Alhamdulillah. So now we have to
شر
look
لكم. Absolutely.
We have to look forward from this.
And this goes hand in hand, talking about this, which was a little bit off topic, but still in relation to how this impacts us, our mood or energy, and how to deal with it, especially this time of year, right? How we feel better, how this makes us feel better in an otherwise helpless situation when we have no control over these injustices. This is it. It absolutely is. And reframing, right? Like you said, I loved how you reframed the fact that we did not have Salah Jama'at today together, especially the lockdown areas, but it was still done online, or those who wanted to do it closer with their families at home rather than separate men and women. You had the opportunity potentially at home, but look at the opportunity as a collective community that we had to come in congregation, in a collective voice together against injustice, right? Like there's so many different ways that you can take control back of the situation. And then we do have more control than we think. And I would use this generally in therapy, right? When you're stuck in a situation, when you feel you can't do much, there are ways of managing. Then we forget that you don't have control of the situation, but there are ways where you can cope and deal with it, right? And it's really important to be aware of that. And I think we've given quite a few strategies already. You can go back and see the video of Sister Zainab. I've put it already out there on Instagram. You could see it, you have it here. And also a lot of the strategies that we have already presented, whether it's spiritual first aid, the halt, the open jellyfish, I've had them all here. And you can now, in terms of resources, let's take a look at some you've already mentioned. You've mentioned CHIO. You can look at MindMaster. So that's accessible online. You can find that anytime there. And also, here in Ottawa, you have the Catholic immigration, right? Like they've got free support there. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a really great resource, regardless of whether you're fleeing violence and abuse or not. You can contact a shelter and request to speak with a transitional support worker. And their role is to transition you or to provide you access to supports. So that's a really good resource. They have them at all shelters, all community health resource centers, which are excellent resources. You can, now there's not really walk-in, but they have virtual walk-in. So you can, even if you don't know which one is the one in your area, you can look up any of them, Community Health Resource Center. And they're happy to, okay, what are your needs? What are your issues? How, boom, boom. It's a one-stop shop. They have mental health services, they have doctors, they have immigration support, they have childcare support, they have
wonderful.
They have legal clinics. So that's a really good option.
And trauma support.
Trauma
support. Yeah.
There's also IWSO, which is Immigrant Women's Services of Ottawa. That's an excellent kind of one-stop shop too.
Yes, OCISO. Yeah, OCISO, Ottawa Community Immigrant Services. That's where I did my training, by the way. That's where I had my internship, my favorite place till now.
OCISO was doing the work before anyone was doing the work. OCISO is really great support. And they're really happy. It is a support. They do provide support for immigrant women. But if you're not immigrant in the sense that you did not come, you do not have an immigration card, they're not going to turn you away. They're going to refer you to service, and they're going to provide support. They also provide support to the children of immigrants or people who are second or third generation. So I really encourage people to access that. There's also ODAWA, which is the Ottawa Native Friendship Center, or Wabano Mental Health. Wabano offers the same thing, one-stop shop. They do provide service for First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Innu, identifying people. But again, if you need service, no one is going to turn you away.
No. They will just turn you to the right supports for you, given where your location. So this is physically in Ottawa, in Ottawa. However, online, there's lots of places. You can contact Nasiha, right? Nasiha, that's a classic that we always turn. People, I'll write it here, the Nasiha hotline. And they are actually, alhamdulillah, they are working on a building where they're going to have on-site counselors now, not just online support, but they will have on-site counselors for therapy, because before they just had the helpline, right, that people can contact, and you can worldwide, you can use it. And it's not just for Muslims, anybody can use that, right? But now they're going to have actual therapists offering free support. And that's due to the community's understanding of how important mental health is. And especially in times of crisis like this, where the phones are ringing off the hook in these times of the year. Whenever these things happen, whenever an international crisis, a local crisis, a terrorist attack, or anything like that, these phone numbers rather these services are ringing off the hook. And so there's a community awareness in the Muslim community, I would say, more so now than before, for the need of these supports for as well. So alhamdulillah wa shukr, we do have these supports available, and you can contact us and we'll be more than happy to send you a list of resources that we have in our back pocket as therapists, that we use also, that we personally use to send our clients or anybody who needs support in this area. Thank you so much, my dear, dear sister Krista. This has been exactly around the time I said that we would need, given how much I know in depth we'd like to get into details with things. And I think it's important to explore that. For any of you who do have questions, please don't hesitate. For any of you who have been impacted by some of the perhaps distressing examples that we brought up and discussed, please don't hesitate to contact Nasiha or any of your supports around you. And although I cannot personally provide counseling, even if you contact me or Krista, we can refer you, inshallah, to people within your area or the general resources that you have. Again, God bless you. And we ask that all of you remember the ones who were oppressed and were martyred during this time. And we continue to pray together, inshallah, in our du'as. The power of prayer, subhanallah, can move mountains, as the expression goes. It is a powerful, powerful way of supporting one another during this time and sending that to them, like Sister Krista was saying, sending that energy. And when you're feeling helpless, remember, you have the power of Allah within you through du'as, through power. Don't ever forget that. And you can share that. You can share and gift that to them, inshallah. This will make you feel better in the process as well. Any final words, my dear sister?
Nothing, just on that, with your practice makes progress. Nothing happens in a day, whether it's the prayer, the dua, the moving forward, just being patient with ourselves, you know, nothing happens in a day. But by making that progress each day, you're going to see a big change. And, you know, thank you again. Like, I really enjoyed it. And you had, like, everyone had beautiful questions. Like, it was really, really quite lovely. Thank you very much. And
bless you all.
We always remember the oppressed, first and foremost, in our hearts.
Inshallah. And remember that, you know, what you're experiencing is normal, given the abnormal circumstances that we're all experiencing right now. God bless you all. Thank you once again for joining us here with the Muslim Counselor, discussing these topics. I'd love to hear your feedback as well. If you'd like other topics, inshallah, you and I will discuss spiritual abuse further. Yes, abuse, so that we can help our communities understand this. So I think we can explore it in good depth. Thank you so much, my dear sister. God bless you all.
Thank you very much.
And inshallah, and bless you and your Eid and your family, inshallah. May Allah accept all of your a'mal, inshallah. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.